what I didn't have for Clinton, we now have for Obama, and that is the specific project code names, which corporations, which sub-facilities, which project code numbers are involved with this. And we have those, and those have been provided through very, very high contacts we have in the White House and in the Senate Intelligence Committee and House Intelligence Committee, and also it's been provided to the new CI Director, Leon Panetta, and Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. Now, whether or not they're actually able to get control of these projects remains to be seen, but they're going to have to try, and to do that, they're going to have to come together and show a great deal of courage.
And you think that they approach you guys because they're passionate about this question? Do you think they realize what this would mean? And that would obviously get us into that question overall, why this group here on Earth then don't want to have disclosure. What would the consequence of disclosure mean in terms of geopolitics, energy, etc.?
Well, it's a little bit like the REM song. It's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine. In other words, if you allow this information out, it isn't just the fact that there's intelligent life out there. More than half of the population of industrialized countries believe that there's intelligent life out there. Even the Vatican has said as much last year in their statements in the last couple of years. And I've had meetings since 1999 and 2000 with very senior Vatican officials, including people who work very closely with both the current Pope and the previous Pope. But what I have found is that the people who are really most concerned about this fall into two camps. The people who want to keep a lid on the science and technology, and the people who want to keep a lid with the current order of religious orthodoxy. And let me explain this, because this is not obvious to people. When you see one of these so-called UFOs, even the ones that are man-made that most people might confuse with an extraterrestrial one, they're not using Exxon fuel or rockets. They're using a whole new type of physics where they're pulling energy out of the fabric of space-time. And there is an energy factor, some will call it zero-point energy, I'm not sure if that's correct, but or the energy within the so-called quantum vacuum of space. And there's an electromagnetic potential that can be tapped. Now, if you set up an electromagnetic system, a high-voltage system, you can actually create a mass cancellation effect where an object can become massless. That's why they look like they levitate or float.
Right.
And it's been incorrectly called anti-gravity. But the only reason it's anti-gravity is because, in point of fact, the mass of the object approaches zero. So and I'm not going to get into the science of this. I'm not a physicist. I'm a medical doctor, and I don't pretend to be a physicist. But we have physicists on our team who do understand this and who I've studied with and who have actually built these systems, by the way, and who we are trying to liberate from the from the national security state, but they're not being allowed to do anything.
Okay, so they can't talk openly yet.
No, they'd absolutely be killed. But I think that, the problem I see is that you have a consortium of interests. I mean, if you look at how Dick Cheney and Halliburton moved the whole oil industry into the White House during the Bush years and just dictated energy policy for the United States in those secret meetings, the records of which have never been released. What you find is that releasing the information that these UFOs are real, also with it is going to have to come the question that any common sense scientist is going to ask: how in the hell are these things moving like this? And when that question is asked, it will be answered, because we have people who can answer it. And when that gets answered, it means it's the end of oil, the end of coal, the end of gas, the end of nuclear power, the end of world poverty, the end of the petrodollar, the end of the current macroeconomic system, which is tantamount to global economic slavery, in my opinion. And I think that you have 200 or 300 individuals and corporations that currently control more than half of the world's wealth. That is a true statistic. And when you see that, it is all about cartels and macroeconomic control. And if you bring out a technology that would allow you to have a generator at your home or in your car that pulls this free energy out of the fabric of space-time, you are never going to be hooked into the utility grid again. You're never going to have to buy petrol from BP or Shell. You're never going to have to buy from Exxon. So this becomes something that is a huge game changer, to use a term, in the macroeconomic order of the world. And this is what they're trying to prevent. It isn't because they're so afraid that people are going to hurl themselves off the Brooklyn Bridge because there's intelligent life out there. Now, the other part of this does speak to more of a philosophical and theological problem. And you can imagine as you know, my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, was the senior project engineer that built the lunar module that put Neil Armstrong on the moon and put the first man on the moon. And so I come from an aerospace family, and his company was Grumman, and it became Northrop Grumman. And what is interesting is that some of the people at JPL that I ended up networking to at Jet Propulsion Labs in California had seen the images of these huge structures on the Mars. And, this is not a myth. They do exist, and they're very ancient. Now, the ones that are ancient have corollaries to some of the ancient structures like the pyramids and obelisks on Earth.
Right.
And there would be an obvious connection. And what I was told by a JPL scientist is that the reason those images aren't being released is because it would collapse the foundations of the orthodox fundamentalist religious belief systems of every organized religion on Earth. And to which I said, well, good, it's time for childhood Zen, let's grow up. He says, oh, no, you don't understand the power of those sort of interests. They do not want their creation myths upended. They do not want... So there's a very powerful theological challenge that would come with this information. And, there's a great deal of evidence, for example, that our civilization has had visits and humanity has had contact with interstellar civilizations going back thousands and thousands of years. Recently in India, there was a several thousand-year-old artifact found showing what appears to be an ET craft and ET beings in a cave in India. We know in France there's a very old cave drawing that quite clearly is showing that. And so the question becomes, this has not only major implications for the macroeconomic and science and technology issues, but for the theological power centers, if you will, and those sort of things. So these are very powerful interests who are slowly coming around to the need for disclosure because they realize that our planet is being destroyed by the current paradigm. But it's a very big task to get everyone on the page with that, and there's always going to be a certain number of hardliners,
of course,
who aren't going to want that. Now, what I have found, it's interesting, when I first briefed the CIA director during the Clinton years, I was specifically told that there were about a third of this so-called Majestic-Group, this committee of 200 or 300 people who have been maintaining these classified projects, who supported the idea of ending secrecy and bringing these technologies out and bringing this information out. I am told now it's about two-thirds, that we've made enormous progress, because I've been having meetings with a lot of these people who are on this committee over the years. What the problem is that a third of them are still vicious and don't mind eating their own. Let me give you an example. Back in the 90s, a member of this committee, Bill Colby, CIA Director Colby, he was very old, and he had decided that what we were advocating was the right thing to do for humanity, and it was time. And his best friend was a colonel who I don't wish to name because he's still living and still very supportive of what we're trying to do. And he approached us and said, look, I'd like to set up a meeting between you and my friend. And his friend was the CIA director, former CIA director Bill Colby, who had been on the inside of Majestic. And what he wanted to do was transfer some of these technologies to us, as well as funding, so we could get these energy systems out to the world before it was too late. Well, the week he was going to meet, that Bill Colby was going to meet with a member of my board of directors, they found him floating down the Potomac River in an alleged accidental, drowning. And it was not an accidental drowning.
Right.
We know